The city lights of Los Angeles painted the evening sky in shades of orange and purple as another day came to an end. For most people heading home after work, it was just another Tuesday evening. But for Robert Chen, sitting on the cold concrete outside a convenience store on Sunset Boulevard, it was day 243 of living on the streets. Robert had never imagined his life would turn out this way. 3 years ago, he was a construction foreman with a steady paycheck, a small apartment, and plans for the future. He had served 2 tours in Iraq and came back with scars that nobody could see. The nightmares started slowly at first, just once or twice a month. Then they became weekly, then nightly. Sleep became his enemy, and he'd wake up in cold sweats, his heart racing, convinced he was back in that desert dodging explosions. His boss had been understanding at first when Robert started showing up late, exhausted and unable to focus. But construction sites demand sharp attention and quick reflexes. After Robert nearly caused an accident because he zoned out while operating machinery, he was let go. It was the right call, he knew that. But it started a domino effect he couldn't stop. Without steady income, the rent became impossible. He moved to a cheaper place, then an even cheaper one. He tried to find other work, but the episodes were getting worse. Sometimes he'd be in the middle of an interview and suddenly feel like the walls were closing in, his chest tight, unable to breathe. He'd have to leave and another opportunity would slip away. Within 6 months, he was evicted. He spent his last bit of savings on a storage unit for his belongings, thinking he'd get back on his feet quickly. That was 8 months ago. Now, as the evening crowd rushed past him on the sidewalk, Robert sat with his back against the store's brick wall, his cardboard sign propped against his knee. He'd written it carefully that morning with a marker someone had left at the bus stop. "Veteran hungry, anything helps." God bless you, he hated that sign. Hated having to hold it. Hated the way it made him feel small and invisible. But pride doesn't fill an empty stomach. The afternoon had been rough. He'd counted 17 people who walked right past him without even glancing down. 5 people who looked, then quickly looked away. 3 who shook their heads with disapproval before he even asked for anything. 1 woman had stopped long enough to tell him he should get a job before hurrying off. If only it were that simple. Around 9 o'clock, the foot traffic started thinning out. Robert's stomach growled loudly. He'd had a stale donut someone gave him that morning and nothing since. He was debating whether to pack up his spot and head to the shelter when he noticed a figure approaching the store entrance. The man was wearing dark jeans, a simple black jacket, and carried a motorcycle helmet under his arm. There was something familiar about him, but Robert couldn't quite place it at first. As the man got closer to the store's bright lights, Robert's breath caught. Even with the casual clothes and the tired look of someone who'd had a long day, there was no mistaking that face. It was Keanu Reeves. Robert had seen his movies, of course. The Matrix had been huge when he was in high school. He'd watched John Wick on a laptop at a friend's place just before everything fell apart. But seeing him in person, just a regular guy buying something at a convenience store, was surreal. The actor walked into the store without noticing Robert, or at least without showing it if he did. Robert sat there for a moment, his mind racing. Should he say something? Ask for help? The guy was probably tired, wanted to be left alone. Rich people got asked for money all the time. They probably hated it. But then again, Robert was hungry, and his shoes had holes in them that let in water every time it rained. What did he have to lose besides a little more dignity? A few minutes later, Keanu walked out carrying a plastic bag with what looked like a sandwich and a bottle of water. As he pushed through the glass door, his eyes swept across the sidewalk, and for just a second, they met Robert's. It was now or never. "Excuse me," Robert said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir. I don't want to be a pain, but if you could spare anything at all, even just some change, I'd really appreciate it." He braced himself for the usual responses, the quick sorry, no cash, or the silent walkaway, or even the annoyed glare. He'd gotten them all before, but what happened next caught him completely off guard. Keanu stopped walking. Not just a pause, but a full stop. He turned toward Robert and for a moment just looked at him, really looked at him, like he was actually seeing him as a person instead of just another homeless guy on the sidewalk. Then to Robert's absolute shock, Keanu walked over and sat down right next to him on the cold concrete. "Hey," Keanu said simply, setting his bag down between them. "What's your name?" Robert stared at him, completely confused. Was this really happening? Was a movie star actually sitting on a dirty sidewalk next to him? Robert Chen. Nice to meet you, Robert. Keanu extended his hand for a shake, not a high five or a fist bump, but a proper handshake like they were meeting at some business lunch. I'm Keanu. Robert shook his hand, still in disbelief. Yeah, I know who you are. I've seen your movies. Keanu smiled a little at that. I hope you liked them. He settled back against the wall, making himself comfortable like he had all the time in the world. So, Robert, how long have you been out here? The question was so direct, so genuinely curious that Robert found himself answering honestly. About 8 months now. Feels longer, though. Were you really in the military? Your sign says veteran. Army, 2 tours in Iraq. Got back about 6 years ago. Robert wasn't sure why he was telling him all this. Maybe it was because Keanu wasn't looking at him with pity or judgment. He was just listening. That must have been tough, both being there and coming back. Keanu's voice was quiet, thoughtful. Coming back was harder, honestly. The words came out before Robert could stop them. He never talked about this with anyone. Over there, at least I knew what I was fighting. Here, I don't even know what's fighting me anymore. I just can't seem to get my feet under me. They sat in silence for a moment, and Robert expected Keanu to make some excuse and leave. But he didn't. Instead, he asked, what happened? If you don't mind me asking, how'd you end up here? And somehow Robert found himself telling the whole story, about the nightmares and the anxiety attacks, about losing his job and his apartment, about trying to get help from the VA but getting lost in paperwork and waiting lists, about how every day on the streets made it harder to imagine ever having a normal life again. He talked about the shame of holding that cardboard sign and how sometimes he felt invisible, like he'd become a ghost that people walked right through. Keanu listened to every word. He didn't interrupt, didn't check his phone, didn't look around impatiently. He sat there on that sidewalk giving Robert something he hadn't had in months, someone who actually cared enough to listen. And when Robert finally finished talking, Keanu shared something that surprised him even more. I know a little bit about darkness, Keanu said softly. I've lost people I loved. My girlfriend and our daughter. My best friend when we were young. There were times I didn't think I could keep going. He looked up at the darkening sky. Pain is something we all carry. Some of us just have heavier bags than others. Robert felt tears prickling at his eyes. He couldn't remember the last time someone had treated him like a real person, with real feelings and a real story. As they sat there together on that sidewalk, he had no idea that this conversation was about to change his entire life. Robert sat there on the sidewalk, still trying to process what was happening. Here was one of the most famous actors in the world, sitting next to him like they were old buddies catching up. The concrete was cold and hard beneath them, and people walking by kept doing double takes, probably wondering if that was really who they thought it was. Keanu reached into his plastic bag and pulled out the sandwich he'd just bought. Without a word, he unwrapped it and broke it in half, offering one piece to Robert. You hungry? Robert's stomach answered for him with a loud rumble. He hesitated for just a second, then took the sandwich. Thank you. You didn't have to do that. I know, Keanu said simply, taking a bite of his half. But sharing food with someone is one of the oldest ways humans connect, right? Besides, I've got another meal waiting at home. You don't. They ate in comfortable silence for a minute. Robert couldn't remember the last time a simple sandwich tasted so good. It wasn't just the food, though. It was sitting here with someone who didn't treat him like he was damaged goods or a problem to be solved. Just another person. Can I ask you something? Robert said between bites. Why'd you sit down? Most people, even when they give money, they just hand it over and keep moving. You could have done that. Keanu thought about it for a moment, wiping his hands on a napkin. I guess because I've learned that sometimes what people need most isn't money. It's to be seen, to be reminded that they matter. He paused, looking down at his hands. When I lost my daughter and my girlfriend, I went through a really dark time. There were days I'd walk around this city feeling completely alone, even in crowds of people. The ones who helped the most weren't the ones who tried to fix everything. They were the ones who just sat with me and let me know I wasn't invisible. Robert nodded slowly. That word hit him hard. Invisible. That's exactly what he'd been feeling for months, like he'd become a ghost that people looked through rather than at. The thing is, Keanu continued, we're all 1 or 2 bad breaks away from where you are right now. People don't like to think about that, so they pretend homeless people don't exist. It makes them uncomfortable to acknowledge that the safety net has holes in it. Big holes, Robert muttered. I tried getting help from the VA. I've got PTSD from my deployments and they've got programs for that. But the waiting lists are months long. I needed help now, not 6 months from now when I'm even worse off. That's broken, Keanu said flatly. People who serve their country shouldn't have to wait months for help they need today. He pulled out his phone, and Robert figured that was the signal their conversation was ending. But instead of standing up to leave, Keanu started typing something. Tell me more about what you need. Not just right now, but to actually get off the streets. If you could wave a magic wand, what would that look like? Robert wasn't expecting that question. Most people asked how they could help in the moment, maybe offer to buy a meal or give some cash. Nobody asked about the bigger picture. He thought carefully before answering. Honestly, I need to get my documents back. My ID and my discharge papers got stolen about a month ago, along with the backpack I kept everything in. Without ID, I can't get a job. Can't even get into most shelters. I need to get to the VA office downtown to start the process of getting replacements. But that's like a 2-hour walk from here, and I've got bad knees from an injury overseas. He felt himself getting worked up, all the frustration pouring out. I need clean clothes for interviews. I need an address to put on applications. I need a phone so employers can call me back, and I need someone to help me figure out all the paperwork. Because my brain just doesn't work right anymore when I try to deal with that stuff. It all feels impossible. Keanu listened to every word, still typing notes into his phone. Okay. So documents, transportation, clothes, an address, and help navigating the system. That's specific. That's actually helpful. He looked up from his phone. You know what the problem is with most charity? It's too vague. People want to help, but they don't know exactly what would actually make a difference. You just told me exactly what would help. Robert felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But he tried to tamp it down. Hope was dangerous when you lived on the streets. It hurt too much when things fell through. Keanu put his phone to his ear. Someone answered, and Robert heard him say, Hey, it's me. Yeah, I know it's late. Listen, I need your help with something tomorrow. There was a pause. No, it's personal. I met someone who needs some assistance getting to the VA office and getting some documents sorted out. Can you make some calls in the morning? Another pause. Perfect. I'm going to give you his number. Wait, Robert, do you have a phone? No, sir, I don't. Keanu thought for a second. Okay, different plan. Robert, where are you usually around 10 in the morning? There's a church 3 blocks that way that serves breakfast at 8. I'm usually around this area by 10, though, trying to get enough for lunch. All right. Keanu pulled out his wallet, but not for the reason Robert expected. He took out a business card and borrowed Robert's marker, writing something on the back. This is my assistant's number. Her name is Linda. Tomorrow morning around 10, there's going to be a car service coming to pick you up right here at this spot. Black sedan. Driver's name will be Tom. He's going to take you to get a phone first, a basic one so people can reach you. Then he'll take you to the VA office. Linda's already talked to some people there and she's going to help cut through the red tape. Robert stared at the card in his hand like it might disappear. You're serious? This isn't a joke? No joke. Tom will be here at 10 sharp. Keanu reached back into his wallet and pulled out several bills. Robert couldn't see exactly how much, but it looked like a lot. This is for tonight and the next few days. Get yourself a motel room. Take a hot shower. Get a good meal. Get some sleep in a real bed. You can't start rebuilding if you're exhausted and hungry. Robert looked down at the money in his hand. It was $600. $600. He felt tears starting to form and tried to blink them back. I don't know what to say. Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me. Maybe that's exactly why, Keanu said. Because I don't need to know your whole life story to know you're a human being who deserves dignity and a chance to get back on your feet. You served your country. You fell on hard times. That doesn't make you less worthy of help. He stood up, brushing off his jeans. Besides, I've been lucky in life. Really lucky. More lucky than any one person probably deserves. What's the point of having resources if you don't use them to help when you can? Robert stood up too, still clutching the money and the business card like lifelines. I'll pay you back. I don't know how or when, but I will. Keanu smiled and shook his head. Don't pay me back. Pay it forward. When you're back on your feet, help someone else who's struggling. That's how we make the world a little less cold. He picked up his helmet and his bag. 10 o'clock tomorrow, right here. Don't forget. Tom will be waiting. I'll be here. I promise. Robert's voice cracked a little. I know you will. Keanu started to walk toward where his motorcycle was parked, then turned back. Hey, Robert, one more thing. You said your brain doesn't work right with paperwork and all that bureaucratic stuff. That's not your fault. That's what trauma does. It's not a character flaw. It's an injury, just like a broken leg. And just like a broken leg, it can heal with the right help. Don't beat yourself up over it. With that, Keanu walked to his motorcycle, put on his helmet, and rode off into the Los Angeles night. Robert stood there on the sidewalk, watching the taillight disappear down Sunset Boulevard. He looked down at the money in his hand, then at the business card, making sure it was all real and not some dream brought on by hunger and exhaustion. For the first time in 243 days, Robert felt like maybe, just maybe, things might actually get better. He carefully folded the bills and tucked them deep into his pocket along with the card. Then he picked up his sign and his small bag of belongings and started walking toward the nearest motel. Tonight he'd sleep in a bed. Tomorrow he'd start the long climb back to the life he'd lost. He had no idea yet just how hard that climb would be, or that he'd need every bit of that hope to make it through what was coming. Robert woke up the next morning in a motel room that smelled like cleaning products and old carpet, but to him it felt like a 5-star hotel. He'd taken 2 showers the night before just because he could. The hot water running over his skin, washing away months of grime and shame, had made him cry harder than he'd cried in years. He'd stood there under that shower head until the water ran cold, just feeling clean for the first time in what seemed like forever. Now, lying in an actual bed with actual sheets, he looked at the clock on the nightstand. 8:30 in the morning. He had an hour and a half before Tom was supposed to pick him up. Part of him wondered if it had all been a dream, if he'd get back to that spot at 10 o'clock and no one would show up. But the business card was still there on the nightstand, and his clothes from yesterday were cleaner than they'd been because he'd washed them in the sink and dried them with the hairdryer. He got up and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. His hair was still too long and messy, his beard was wild, and his clothes had seen better days, but his eyes looked different. There was something in them that hadn't been there yesterday. It took him a minute to recognize what it was. It was possibility. By 9:45, Robert was back at the convenience store, standing in the same spot where he'd sat the night before. He couldn't sit down because he was too nervous, too wound up with anxiety and hope and fear all mixed together. What if the car didn't come? What if it did come, but then everything fell apart anyway? What if he messed this up somehow? At exactly 10 o'clock, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. The driver, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a slight limp, got out and looked around. Robert Chen? That's me. Robert's voice came out shaky. I'm Tom. Ms. Linda sent me to pick you up. He opened the back door. Come on, we've got a busy day ahead. Robert climbed into the back seat, feeling completely out of place. The car was clean and comfortable, and it smelled like leather and air freshener. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been in a car that wasn't a police cruiser or an ambulance. As they drove through the city, Tom made easy conversation. Ms. Linda told me a bit about your situation. Want to know what the plan is for today? Yeah, that'd be good. First stop is a mobile phone store. We're getting you a basic smartphone. Nothing fancy, but enough to make calls and check emails. The account's already set up and paid for 6 months. Second stop is the VA office downtown. Linda pulled some strings and got you an appointment with a caseworker at 11:30. Third stop, if we have time, is getting you some clothes. Linda said you mentioned needing interview clothes. Robert felt overwhelmed. This is too much. I can't accept all this. Tom glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Look, I don't know what you did to impress Mr. Reeves, but in the 15 years I've driven for him, I've never seen him get personally involved like this. He usually just donates money to organizations and moves on, but you? He called Linda himself at 9 at night, which he never does. So whatever you two talked about, it mattered to him. Don't feel bad about accepting help. Just make the most of it. They stopped at a phone store first. The whole process took 30 minutes. Robert walked out with a working phone that had Linda's number already programmed in, along with Tom's in the VA office. Tom showed him how to use the basics while they drove to the next stop. The VA office was a big government building that Robert had walked past a dozen times, but never had the courage to enter. The bureaucracy of it all had always felt like climbing a mountain he didn't have the strength for. But today, with Tom beside him at an actual appointment, it felt different. Linda met them in the lobby. She was a woman in her 40s wearing a business suit and carrying a folder thick with papers. Robert, I'm Linda. It's good to meet you. She shook his hand firmly. I've been working on your case since last night. I've got some good news and some challenging news. They sat in a quiet corner of the lobby. Linda opened her folder. The good news is I've been able to fast-track your request for replacement documents. Your DD-214 discharge papers and your ID should be processed within 2 weeks instead of 6 months. I've also got you enrolled in a housing assistance program specifically for veterans. There's a transitional housing facility in Glendale that has an opening. It's yours if you want it. Robert felt his chest tighten with emotion. If I want it? Of course I want it. Good. You can move in as early as next week once your documents come through. Now here's the challenging part. Linda's expression grew more serious. You mentioned PTSD. The housing program requires that you actively participate in treatment. That means therapy appointments, group sessions, and possibly medication management. It's not optional. If you stop going, you lose the housing. Can you commit to that? Robert thought about the nightmares, the panic attacks, the way his brain seemed to short-circuit when he got stressed. He'd been avoiding dealing with it for years. Yeah, I can do that. I need to do that. Okay, I'm also getting you enrolled in a job training program. It starts in 3 weeks. You'll learn new skills, get certifications, and they help with job placement afterward. Linda pulled out more papers. I need you to sign these forms. Take your time and read them. I know paperwork is hard for you, so I'm here to explain anything that doesn't make sense. For the next hour, Linda walked Robert through every single form, explaining things in plain English instead of government speak. She never made him feel stupid for asking questions. She never got impatient. When Robert's hand started shaking from anxiety while trying to sign one of the forms, she just waited calmly until he was ready. Afterward, Tom drove Robert to a thrift store that had nice clothes for cheap. Linda had given him $200 specifically for this. Get 3 outfits, she'd said. 2 for interviews and 1 that's just comfortable and makes you feel good. Robert found 2 button-down shirts, a pair of dress pants, a belt, and some decent shoes. For his comfortable outfit, he picked a simple hoodie and jeans that reminded him of what he used to wear before everything went wrong. The whole shopping trip cost $140. He kept the remaining $60 for emergencies. That night, back in the motel room that he'd paid for another 3 nights, Robert sat on the bed with his new phone and just stared at it. Everything was happening so fast. Yesterday he was invisible, sitting on a sidewalk with a cardboard sign. Today he had a phone, new clothes, appointments set up, and a real path forward. It felt surreal. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. Hey Robert, it's Keanu. Linda told me today went well. Proud of you for showing up and doing the work. Remember, 1 day at a time. You've got this. Robert read the message 3 times. A movie star was texting him words of encouragement. His life had become so strange. He typed back slowly, still getting used to the phone. Thank you for everything. I won't let you down. The response came quick. You can't let me down. The only person you need to focus on is yourself. This journey is yours, not mine. I just opened a door. You're the one walking through it. Robert set the phone down and lay back on the bed. He felt exhausted, but in a good way, like he'd actually accomplished something today instead of just surviving. For the first time in months, he thought about the future beyond just tomorrow. He thought about having his own place again, having a job, maybe even reconnecting with his sister, who he hadn't talked to in 2 years because he was too ashamed. But as he started to drift off to sleep, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a warning. Things were going too well. Life on the streets had taught him that hope was fragile, and that bad things could happen just when you thought you were finally safe. He pushed the thought away and focused on the positive. He had help now. He had resources. He had people in his corner. What Robert didn't know yet was that the hardest part wasn't getting help. The hardest part was going to be accepting that he deserved it, and learning how to live with himself again. The real battle was just beginning, and it would test him in ways that surviving on the streets never had. 3 weeks had passed since that night outside the convenience store, and Robert was standing in his new room at the Veterans Transitional Housing Facility in Glendale. It wasn't much, just a small space with a bed, a desk, a closet, and a shared bathroom down the hall. But it was his. His own space with a door that locked and a window that let in actual sunlight. He should have been happy. He should have been grateful. He was grateful. But standing there in that quiet room, Robert felt something dark creeping up from inside his chest. It was a feeling he recognized too well. The walls seemed to be getting closer. His breathing got shallow. His heart started racing. He sat down on the bed and tried the breathing exercises his new therapist had taught him. Count to 4 breathing in. Hold for 4. Count to 4 breathing out. It wasn't working. The panic was building anyway, like a wave he couldn't stop. Robert had been doing everything right. He'd gone to every therapy appointment, even the ones that made him want to run out of the room. He'd attended the group sessions with other veterans, listening to their stories that sounded so much like his own. He'd started the job training program, learning skills he could actually use. He'd even called his sister, and they'd had a tearful conversation where she told him she'd been worried sick about him. Everything was going right. So why did he feel so wrong? The nightmares hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd gotten worse. Almost every night he woke up sweating, his heart pounding, convinced he was back in Iraq dodging gunfire. His roommate down the hall had complained twice about Robert screaming in his sleep. He felt like he was disturbing everyone around him, like he was a problem that couldn't be fixed. And then there was the guilt. The crushing, suffocating guilt that he didn't deserve any of this. There were other people on those streets, people he'd sat next to and shared food with, people who were still out there in the cold. Why did he get saved? What made him special? He'd just been lucky enough to be sitting in the right spot when the right person walked by. It didn't feel fair. That night, the darkness got worse. Robert lay in bed at 2 a.m. staring at the ceiling, feeling like he was drowning. He'd had another nightmare, worse than usual. In it, he'd watched his squad members die all over again. Only this time, when he looked down at his hands, they were covered in blood that wouldn't wash off. He got out of bed and paced the small room. 5 steps one way, 5 steps back. His mind was racing with thoughts that scared him. Thoughts about how maybe everyone would be better off if he just disappeared. Thoughts about how he was wasting resources that could go to someone who actually deserved them. Thoughts about how he'd never really get better, that he was fundamentally broken. At 2:30 a.m, Robert did something he never thought he'd do. His hands shaking, he picked up his phone and pulled up Keanu's number. He'd never actually called it. They'd exchanged a few text messages, but Robert had felt too awkward to actually call. What would he even say? But right now, in this moment, he felt like he was falling apart and didn't know who else to reach out to. His therapist had given him a crisis hotline number, but Robert didn't want to talk to a stranger reading from a script. He wanted to talk to someone who might actually understand. His finger hovered over the call button. It was the middle of the night. Keanu was probably asleep. He'd probably be annoyed. But Robert couldn't shake the feeling that if he didn't reach out to someone right now, he might do something he couldn't take back. He pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Robert was about to hang up when someone answered. Robert? It was Keanu's voice, alert despite the late hour. I'm sorry, Robert said immediately, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry for calling this late. I shouldn't have. I didn't know who else. Hey, it's okay. Keanu's voice was calm, steady. I'm awake. What's going on? And then it all came pouring out. Robert told him about the nightmares getting worse, about feeling like he didn't deserve the help he was getting, about the guilt of being saved when others weren't, about feeling like he was broken beyond repair and wasting everyone's time and resources. The words tumbled out in a jumbled mess, and Robert couldn't stop them even if he wanted to. Keanu listened without interrupting. When Robert finally ran out of words, there was a moment of silence on the other end. Then Keanu spoke, and his voice had a weight to it that Robert hadn't heard before. Robert, listen to me very carefully. What you're feeling right now, it's real and it's hard, but it's not the truth. Your brain is lying to you. Depression and trauma do that. They tell you stories that feel true but aren't. But I don't deserve this, Robert said, tears running down his face. There are people still out there on those streets. Good people, why me? What makes me so special? You want to know why you? Keanu said. Because you were there. Because our paths crossed. There's no grand reason, no cosmic plan. It's random and it's not fair. But you know what? If you give up now, if you walk away from this chance, it doesn't help those other people. It just means one more person lost to the darkness. The way you honor them is by getting better, and then helping others the way you were helped. Robert sat down on the edge of his bed, trying to process those words. I've been where you are, Keanu continued. Different circumstances, but the same dark place. After I lost my girlfriend and my daughter, there were nights I didn't think I could make it to morning. I had people tell me it would get better, and I wanted to punch them because how could it possibly get better? But here's what I learned. It doesn't get better all at once. It gets better in tiny moments. One good hour, then one good day, then a few good days. And yeah, there are setbacks. There are still hard nights. But slowly, so slowly you barely notice, the good starts to outweigh the bad. I'm scared, Robert admitted. I'm scared of failing. I'm scared of ending up back on those streets. I'm scared that I'm just fooling myself thinking I can have a normal life again. Fear is normal, Keanu said. Fear means you care about what happens next. But listen, you're not failing. Do you know how I know that? Because you called someone instead of sitting alone with those dark thoughts. You reached out. That takes courage. That's not failure. That's fighting. They talked for over an hour. Keanu shared stories about his own struggles with grief and depression. He talked about the therapy that had helped him, and the days when therapy didn't feel like enough. He talked about learning to accept help without feeling weak. He talked about understanding that healing wasn't linear, that there would be good days and bad days, and that was okay. You served your country, Keanu said. You survived war. You survived months on the streets. You're a survivor, Robert. This is just another battle, and you've got weapons now. You've got therapy. You've got housing. You've got people in your corner. You've got me, and I'm not going anywhere. Why do you care so much? Robert asked. You don't owe me anything. You already did more than anyone could expect. Because everyone deserves someone in their corner, Keanu said simply. And because I've learned that we're not put on this earth just to accumulate things or be successful. We're here to help each other. That's what makes life meaningful. You helped me too, you know. How did I help you? You reminded me why I do this. Why I try to help when I can. You reminded me that people are worth fighting for even when they don't believe in themselves yet. Keanu paused. Now I want you to promise me something. Tomorrow morning, you're going to call your therapist and tell them about tonight. You're going to be honest about how you're feeling. Can you do that? Yeah, Robert said. I can do that. Good. And Robert, you're going to get through this. Not because I say so, but because you're stronger than you think. The fact that you're still here, still fighting, proves that. After they hung up, Robert sat in his room as the first light of dawn started creeping through his window. He still felt heavy. The darkness hadn't magically disappeared, but something had shifted. He didn't feel quite so alone anymore, and for tonight that was enough. He made it through to morning, and that, his therapist would later tell him, was a victory worth celebrating. 14 months. That's how long it had been since Robert sat on that cold sidewalk outside a convenience store and met a stranger who changed his life. 14 months of therapy sessions, bad days and better days, small victories and occasional setbacks. 14 months of slowly, painfully, rebuilding a life he thought he'd lost forever. Robert stood in front of the mirror in his small apartment, adjusting his tie. It was a studio apartment, nothing fancy, but it was his. He'd moved out of the transitional housing 3 months ago after saving enough money from his new job. The walls were bare except for a single photo he'd framed, a picture his sister had taken of him and his nephew at a birthday party last month. He looked different in that photo, healthier, almost happy. Today was special. Today he was speaking at a fundraiser for a homeless veterans organization. When they'd first asked him, he'd almost said no. The idea of standing in front of a crowd and sharing his story terrified him. But his therapist had encouraged him to do things that scared him, to push past the comfort zone he'd built around himself. So he'd said yes, even though his hands were shaking just thinking about it. The job had been a turning point. He worked as a logistics coordinator for a nonprofit that helped veterans find housing and employment. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was meaningful. He spent his days helping people navigate the same broken systems he'd struggled with, cutting through red tape, making phone calls, filling out paperwork. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady. More importantly, it made him feel useful again. Like he had a purpose. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they were less frequent now. Once or twice a week instead of every single night. He'd learned techniques to manage them, ways to ground himself when he woke up in a panic. He'd learned that healing wasn't about making the trauma disappear. It was about learning to live with it, to carry it without letting it crush him. Robert grabbed his keys and headed out. The fundraiser was at a hotel downtown, one of those fancy places with chandeliers and carpet so thick your feet sank into it. As he walked into the ballroom, he felt completely out of place among the suits and evening dresses. But then he spotted Linda in the crowd and she waved him over with a warm smile. "You ready for this?" she asked. "Not even a little bit," Robert admitted. "But I'm going to do it anyway." That's the spirit. Linda had become more than just Keanu's assistant who'd helped him that first day. She'd checked in on him regularly over the past year, celebrated his victories, and talked him through his struggles. She'd become a friend. The event started with dinner and speeches from various organizers. Robert barely tasted his food. His stomach was doing flips. When they called his name to come to the podium, his legs felt like they might not work. But he stood up and walked to the front of the room, his heart hammering in his chest. He looked out at the crowd of about 200 people. Rich donors, city officials, veterans advocates, and there, sitting at a table near the back, was Keanu. Robert hadn't known he was coming. Their eyes met and Keanu gave him a small nod of encouragement. Robert cleared his throat and began to speak. "A little over a year ago, I was homeless. I was sitting on a sidewalk with a cardboard sign, trying to disappear into myself because being invisible hurt less than being seen with pity or disgust." His voice was shaky at first, but it got stronger as he continued. "I was a veteran with PTSD, a man who'd lost everything and didn't know how to ask for help or even if I deserved help." He told them about his lowest moments, about the nightmares and the shame, about feeling like a burden on society. He told them about the night a stranger sat down next to him on that cold sidewalk and treated him like a human being. He didn't mention Keanu by name, just called him someone who showed me kindness when I needed it most. "Here's what I learned," Robert said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Homelessness isn't a character flaw. It's not laziness or bad choices, at least not for most of us. It's what happens when people fall through the cracks of systems that are supposed to catch them. It's what happens when someone needs help, but can't navigate the maze of bureaucracy to get it. It's what happens when mental health issues go untreated because treatment is too expensive or too hard to access." He talked about the importance of programs that didn't just hand out money, but actually helped people rebuild their lives. Programs that offered therapy, job training, transitional housing, and most importantly, someone to guide you through the process when your brain was too broken to figure it out yourself. "I'm standing here today because someone took the time to see me as a person with potential instead of a problem to be solved. I'm here because I got help that addressed not just my immediate needs but the underlying issues that put me on those streets in the first place." Robert paused, collecting his thoughts. "But I think about the guys I met out there who are still struggling. Good people. Veterans like me. And I think about how random it was that I got help. I was just in the right place at the right time. That shouldn't be how it works. Everyone deserves that chance, not just the lucky ones." He finished his speech by talking about his work at the nonprofit, about the veterans he'd helped in the past few months, about how the best way to thank someone for saving your life was to help save someone else's. When he stepped away from the podium, the applause was thunderous. Several people were wiping their eyes. After the formal program ended, Robert found himself surrounded by people wanting to shake his hand and hear more of his story. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. Then the crowd parted and Keanu was standing there. They hadn't seen each other in person since that night on the phone when Robert had been at his lowest point. They'd exchanged texts periodically, but Keanu had deliberately stepped back to let Robert find his own way. "You need to do this for yourself, not for me," he'd said. "You came," Robert said. "Of course I came. Wouldn't miss it." Keanu smiled. "That was a hell of a speech. You okay up there? You looked nervous." "I was terrified. Still am, honestly." Robert laughed. "But my therapist says doing things that scare you is how you grow." Smart therapist. Keanu looked at Robert, really looked at him. "You look good, man, healthy. How are you really doing?" "Better, not perfect. I still have hard days. But the good days outnumber the bad ones now, and that's something I never thought I'd be able to say." Robert felt emotion rising in his throat. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you. Not just for the money or the help, but for seeing me when I felt invisible. For treating me like I mattered. You did matter. You do matter." Keanu put a hand on Robert's shoulder. "And you don't need to thank me. You did all the hard work. You showed up to therapy even when you didn't want to. You pushed through the dark nights. You rebuilt your life piece by piece. That was all you. But I couldn't have done it without that first push. without someone believing I was worth helping. Maybe, Keanu said. But now you're the one giving other people that push. That guy you mentioned in your speech, the one you helped get into housing last month? You were his person who believed in him, and he'll probably help someone else down the line. That's how it works. That's how we make the world a little less cold. They talked for a while longer, catching up properly. Keanu told him about his latest film project. Robert told him about his nephew and how good it felt to be back in his family's life. Eventually, the crowd thinned out and it was time to go. As they walked out together, Robert thought about that night 14 months ago. He thought about how close he'd come to giving up, how easy it would have been to just disappear. He thought about all the moments since then when he'd wanted to quit but hadn't. You know what the weirdest part is? Robert said as they stood outside the hotel. A year ago, I would have given anything just to have a roof over my head and enough food to eat. Now I have that, plus a job and an apartment and my family back in my life. And I'm still not perfectly happy all the time. I thought getting off the streets would fix everything, but I'm still me, still dealing with the same demons. That's because happiness isn't a destination, Keanu said. It's not something you achieve and then you're done. It's something you choose every day, even on the hard days. Especially on the hard days. They said their goodbyes and Robert watched Keanu disappear into the Los Angeles night, just like he had that first night. But this time, Robert wasn't alone on a cold sidewalk wondering how he'd survive until morning. This time he was standing on his own 2 feet, heading back to his own apartment with plans for tomorrow and hope for the future. He pulled out his phone and looked at his calendar. Tomorrow he had a meeting with a veteran who'd just been approved for transitional housing. The guy was scared and didn't believe things could get better. Robert knew exactly how he felt, and he couldn't wait to tell him that it could, and it would, one day at a time. As Robert walked to his car, he thought about something his therapist had told him. You can't save everyone, she'd said, but you can be someone's reason to keep trying. And sometimes that's enough. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.